Hello, welcome to Information Security and Management. In this video, we are going to tackle your security access control. All right? Now, in running a business, there's no easy task at all. And with the multiple challenges demanding your constant attention, even a small business actually needs security, specifically on their information. And one essential element that a company or that an owner has to regularly work on is to overlook or oversee the company's information security policy. May that be a big company or a small company. Now, unfortunately, it often takes a major system intrusion before a company or an entity begin cybersecurity seriously. And that is true. Why? Because we experienced that already with my company or with my former colleague. Okay? What happened? We actually have a control. However, we did not, or the company is not taking it seriously, or the data privacy officer is not taking his job seriously. And so what happened? Okay? What happened is that in our vicinity itself, there was a report that informations are accessed by customers or by clients. And of course, the general manager was really frustrated about it. Okay, so what happened? Actually, what happened to the DPO is that he was replaced because accordingly, he's not doing the job properly. Okay, we could have prevented that intrusion with the information, okay, or we could have prevented any distraction if there is enough security control that is implemented. Okay? Now, to effectively protect your data, the organization's access control policy must address some of the questions. So, what are the questions? And it also it also serves as a guide, I should say. Now, what are those questions? Number one, what security do we need? Or why is it important? Okay? Which organization need it most? Now, nowadays, this question is a very generic question, and most likely every entity would need security already, even just a simple security control, okay? And of course, what challenges may the company and of course the security professional can face in terms of security access or information security access and control. Now, if you want to protect your data in your company, in your entity, you should ensure financial and reputational well-being, and it is essential to formulate a rigid set of information security access control. These buffers and limits serves as the invaluable first line of defense against cyber threats. So in order for you to create a first line defense, number one, your company or your entity should have access controls. Okay? Now let us start with your access control. What is an access control? Your access control is a fundamental component of data security, and it dictates who is allowed to access and use company information resources. Again, what does it dictate? It dictates who is allowed to access and use company information. All right? Through authentication and authorization, your access control policy makes sure that users have appropriate access to the data. Your access control is also applied to limit physical access to campuses, buildings, rooms, and data centers, meaning not only about the information, but also access like inside an office, inside a room, inside an asset, okay, or your asset of the company. You need an access control. And your access control is a method of guaranteeing that users are who they say they are and that they have appropriate access to data. All right? Now, in any access control policy or environment, your policy will specify access rights and decide whether requests made by principals should be allowed or rejected. Now, who are the principals in your access control? You have the user or the human worker, okay? like your employees, the workforce, the management. How about the object? It is the resource or the data. It could be a transaction, it could be a transaction receipt, invoice, what else? Your computer informations, those stored on your system, and of course the subject, what process the user employs. Okay, what system do you specifically use? Again, those are the three principles of your access control environment. And when creating enterprise information security policy and your cybersecurity control checklist, you'll have to determine if your company's philosophy are answering questions like who is the company or who in your company has an access to data. And in terms of the access, you also have to dissect that. Who has read-only access, meaning they cannot modify? Who has a modification access? Okay, so who can modify? Who can alter? Okay, because when we talk about modification already, we are also concerned about the integrity of your data already. Okay? What else? How do you ensure that those who attempt to enter have the approval to do so? Like me, okay? In a system or in our system, do I have approval? Okay? Can I really have an access? Next is how do you determine who you grant or deny access to? Let us say I have a subordinate. Is my subordinate allowed to have an access on my computer or to have an access on a certain information or certain data that I enter into the computer? How do I determine if I give them an access or not? So those are the questions that you have to ask yourself as a user and the company itself. Okay? As of course the user and of course implementer of your access control. All right? And your access control of course plays directly into such question. And of course, at its essence, the security feature will regulate the flow of the information and will dictate how the user and the system can connect or interact with other system and resources, especially now that you are trying to integrate every process in your system already. And you definitely have to complement that with a good security access control. Okay? Now, this is all complicated by the following, meaning your access control. It is complicated by number one, the different types of users. Okay? It is complicated by the different types of users. Whether internal user, outside user, it is a partner, it's management, or contractor, each will require different level of access. So your, let us say your DPO, your IT management security, what else? Your MIS should be identifying the level of access as well. Next, user identity data. This is also one of the things that may complicate your access control. There is data that must be stored regarding the various users, including their personal data, password, and contact information. The next one is your resource with different classification levels. So let's just write resource. This is another thing that will complicate your access control because certain resources may have more or fewer restriction upon them. Okay? And they could be confidential, it could be private, it could be public, or for internal use only. So you have to select which among information that you have is for public, which among those is for private, and which among those is for internal use only. Next is the changing business setup. And this is another thing that complicates your access control system. Okay? A business is rarely static, meaning it is subject to change. There's constant change with employees coming in and out, and that is true, especially if you have a high turnover of employees. The roles that are shifting and the business need are fluctuating. And as such, your access needs will vary accordingly or it will change according to what is happening to the company. And one last thing that may complicate your access control is the range of devices that people use. Range of devices. What devices do a company use? Okay? Can you access that on your mobile phone? Can you access that on your tablet? Or you can only access that on company PCs, okay, and only inside the company, meaning if you're outside, you cannot do any report, you cannot access any information, all right? So those are the things that may complicate your access control. And your access control has three primary components. Okay, let's go to the three primary components of your access control. Number one, your identification. Your identification is the business first means of corroborating that a user is who claim to be. Okay, meaning you collect information and you prove that he is what he is claiming to be. Okay, meaning pag sinabi niyang oh, I am the manager, so I should have an access on this information. You have to identify really if in that company he is part of the managerial team, okay, or he's part of the middle management team, and so you have to prove his identity. Now, each name or number should be unique to ensure culpability. It should be undisclosed to other user and free of any reference to user's role or title. Again, let us enumerate in your identification, when you give naming, okay, a username or account number must be unique. Another, okay, it should be undisclosed. And lastly, it should be free of any reference. Okay? That's part of your first set or first step in corroborating information about your user of who they really are. Number two, the second primary component is the authentication. If you try to notice, your authentication or authorization may mean the same, but in your access control, it's not the same. When you say authentication, authentication is the cybersecurity technique used to verify or prove the user's identity. So let's write it down. Verify or prove user's identity. Okay? And under your authentication, you have three main authentication password, and this is very familiar to you. Number one, you have your passwords and pins. These are private bits of information that only a specific user would and should know. This is the cheapest and most common means of authentication and is the least secure as a result. So imagine setting up a password and pins is actually the least secure information control. All right? That includes also your encryptions because that still includes passwords. What else? Access cards and keys. Are you familiar with the access cards that use in the hotels or in some company now they have key cards already? All right. So your access cards and key cards, this is a cryptographic keys and smart cards provided or providing a digital signature or two-factor authentication. And usually, if you have a great MIS team, they could actually provide you an access card or your key card. Okay? And lastly, of course, your biometrics, another famous access control. This is the most expensive, however, and secure authentication methodology. Of course, each of us or each employee, let us say, each employee in a company, of course, you have your own identity already. If you talk about biometrics, you cannot say that if you enter your thumb on the biometric system that it is or you is the another user or the other user is you, okay? And of course, that's the strongest among all identification for your access control or identification need. Now, let's just try to give an example. Aside from your fingerprint, you have retina scan, you have iris scan, palm scan, facial scan, hand topography, voice print, and of course, signature or keyboard dynamics. Now let's go to your authorization. After you have gone through identification and authentication, your authorization controls the level of access and the ability to change. Okay? It controls level of access and the ability to change, edit, or disseminate certain data. Okay? Meaning, in terms of your authorization or under your authorization, it will now identify, should I give this information to this specific employee? Because if not, the system will not do so. Okay? And you'll have to determine the level of access that an authorized user has both to data and behavior. Now, any organization whose employees connect to the internet, in other words, or every organization today needs some level of access control in place. And that is true under your authorization. That especially true of business with employees who work out of the office and require access to company data, resources, and services, just like, let's say, your accountant. Okay? In an accounting firm, you even work outside of the company. Let us say you render extra work. You really need to finish a certain report. And in order for you to access information, you should have with you your laptop and, of course, an access even though you're outside. So the authorization process will do that. Okay? Now, let's go to the types of your access control. When you create your information security framework, you'll have to determine the proper access control model, and typically based on two factors. So your access control type is based on two factors. So let's write those two factors down. Number one, the type of data that, that needs to be accessed. Okay? This is the first factor that affects in determining an access control model. The type of data that needs to be accessed. Number two, the sensitivity of data required for access. Okay? These are the two factors that may affect and determine the access control model that a company should have. Now let's go to your different access control. Number one, preventing access. If you say preventing access, if there is no privileges, the system prevents a subject from assessing or accessing, I should say, the object. Okay, that's your preventing access, meaning you will not be allowed as early as now. Next, determining access. Using the policy or using this policy, you try to decipher whether or not a subject has access to take action with a subject. Next, you have granting access already. It will provide a subject with access to an object. Ideally, this should be access to just one object and not several. Next is revoking access. It is confiscating a subject's access to an object, or meaning you remove the right of access. And of course, you have auditing your access. It is figuring out which objects a subject has access to. And of course, today, or in your modern world, most companies will select one of the following four types of information security control. So your types of information security control, it's either your DAC, MAC, RBAC, or ABAC. Okay? Let's start with your discretionary access control. An older methodology, okay, so your discretionary access control is an older methodology and assigns access rights based on rules that users stipulate, and basically subjects get to regulate who has access to object. They regulate again who has access to object. With DAC model, the data owner decides on access, and DAC is a mean of assigning access rights based on rules that user specify. Next, you'll have your mandatory access control, or your MAC. Your MAC is a non-discretionary model where users are granted access based on information clearance. Again, they are given access based on info clearance. Okay? Assignment are made through your regulations coming from central authority. So you have a central authority here. Okay? And of course, in a hierarchical company or system, the top level determines what lower level have access to. They can identify if it could modify a certain information upon access. They will be identifying if they should only have a read-only access, meaning they can just see the information but they cannot modify it. And of course, MAC is a policy in which your access rights are assigned based on regulation from a central authority. So the central authority is your key information regarding mandatory access control. Next, we go to your role-based access control or your RBAC. Access to information is limited only under your role-based access control. It is limited solely to necessary or solely necessary to carry out their role within a business. So meaning, your access is based on what role you are doing in the business. Let us say your role is about costing, then you do not have any access or you should not have any access regarding any revenues or any other expenditures or any other information that's not related to cost. Okay? And of course, it uses security principles like separation of privilege, okay? Like your separation of duty or the least privilege to determine who gets access to what, okay? Who gets access to what. Thus, someone attempting to access information can only access data that is deemed necessary for their role. Again, let us say if my role is only a teacher or only an instructor, let's say in my system or in UC system, I can only access information that is necessary for my role as a professor or as an instructor. Okay? I cannot access any information that the accounting department may access or any information that the management office can access or would only have an access. And lastly, you have your attribute-based access control or your ABAC. This is also known as policy-based access control. So let's write it down. Policy-based access control. Resources and users are ascribed attributes based upon a comparative assessment of said attributes, and this attribute may include user attribute, resource attribute, locational attribute, environmental attribute, and objective attribute. Alright? Now, in this dynamic method, a comparative assessment of users' attribute including time of the day, position and location are used to make a decision on access to a resource. Alright, and of course, in your system control and your system environment in creating access control tools, you have to identify or you have to use your if-then. Let us say if he needs to do this report, then they should have access to this information first or to this data. All right? And of course, it is imperative for organizations to decide which model is most appropriate for them based on data sensitivity and operational requirement for data access. Again, based on data sensitivity and operational requirements. Now, in particular, your organization that process personally identifiable information or other sensitive information, let us say you have health insurance portability, you have accountability act or controlled and classified information, you must make access control a core capability in your security architecture. Meaning, let us say if you are a large company and you really have a great number of information or data being taken care of, you should make your access control a core capability, okay? Meaning if you have a department for your accounting, if you have a department for your health and safety, you should also have a department for your cyber security. And let us say that's under your MIS or that is under your IT department. so that you can secure the integrity, confidentiality, and availability of your information. Okay? Now, you also have risks in your security. Okay? And of course, you have to assess that. In assessing risk, you have to do your risk assessment, you have to do risk analysis, and a risk treatment and risk monitoring. So let me just share to you the whiteboard for a while so we can write it down. Again, under your access control, you also have to assess risk. And in assessing risk, what are your steps? Number one, risk assessment. Okay? Under your risk assessment, you identify risks and hazards that might arise due to your business, culture, or system. Number two, risk analysis. Under your risk analysis, the identified risks are ranked according to a cost-benefit analysis, determining the potential impact, probability of its occurring, and the cost. That is under your risk analysis. Next, after your risk analysis, you do your risk treatment. What is involved in risk treatment? Under the risk treatment, once you are done the assessment and the analysis, or once the assessment and the analysis are complete, you can begin delineating preventive measures for treating or minimizing the potential risk, meaning the current risk already that you have, and of course, any future risk that you may face. And of course, risk monitoring. Under the risk monitoring, risk will inevitably change, of course, or new ones will arise. And of course, you should expect that as a company. Now, an effective control system will maintain regular auditing and monitoring in response to natural security fluctuation. And in order to decrease the risk, what do you need to do? Number one, you should always, or you are always the target. You have to know that you are always a target when you talk about risk in your access. Number two, what should you do or what should you consider? You should consider keeping software up to date. Okay? And aside from keeping that up to date, you should ensure backups. Okay? That's one of the basic preventive control that you should have. And of course, use smart password management. And in our modern technology now, you should be really using those already to decrease the risk. Again, take note that you are the target. Next, keep software up to date. And number three, use smart password management. Because aside from password or pins for authentication, it should also be a critical, okay? It should be wise decision if you have passwords or PIN. Might as well you use smart passwords or smart password management already. Okay? Next, work with a partner on vulnerability, tracking, and reporting. Next, this is your working with a partner. This is applicable to your MIS team, of course, your IT team, or your cybersecurity team. All right? And lastly, don't leave devices unattended. This is the crucial part of this. Because let us say you printed information or your monitor contains all the reports that you have. It is open, it's wide open on your monitor, and you left your office just for a really while, okay? That matters already. So you always try to check, okay? Don't leave devices unattended. Your mobile phones, it can include confidential information not only about you, but also about the entity you are working with. So please be careful with your informations, okay? Next, we go to your slides already. Let's go back. Let's go to access control administration. Together with your access control system is of course an access control administration. Again, what's your access control? It is your security feature that control how users and system communicate and interact with other system and resources. When you say access, that is the flow of information between a subject and a resource. The subject is an active entity that requests access to the resource or the data. Okay? Now let's go to your access control administration. Your access control administration can be done into two methods. Number one, you have your centralized, and number two, you have decentralized. So let's start with your centralized. Your centralized access control methodology, there is only one entity and is responsible for overseeing access to all corporate resources. Okay, you have only one entity identifying who should have access and what should be accessed by them. This type of administration provides a consistent and uniform method of controlling user access. They provide what? Consistent and uniform method. Okay? Because whatever is done in the central system on how they authenticate or how they allow accounting access, that's also what they do with their control allowing the medical staffs. Okay? Next, you have your decentralized. Your decentralized access control administration is a method that gives control of access to the people closer to the resources. In this approach, it is often a functional manager who assigns access control right to the employee. Who provides access control? The functional manager. Okay? Your functional manager is the one who is assigning access control rights to employees. Now, under a decentralized access control, changes can happen faster through administration or through this type of administration. Why? Because not just one entity is making changes for the whole organization, but a lot of them. Okay? And there is possibility for conflicts to arise that may not benefit the organization as because different managers can practice security and access control in different ways because as you see, it is your functional manager who provides access to employees and there is possibility that certain control may overlap and in which case actions may should or may not properly prescribed or restricted. Okay? And this type of administration, your decentralized, does not provide method of consistent control. Now, how do you do access control monitoring? Okay? You have your access control monitoring and this is a method of keeping track of who attempts to access specific network. They keep track of who attempts, okay? Who's trying to intrude, who's trying to enter the system, who's trying to retrieve an information. Now, your ACM or your access control monitoring fall into two categories. You have intrusion prevention system and intrusion detection system. Okay? Let us start first with the intrusion detection system. Your intrusion detection is a process of detecting an unauthorized use of or attack upon a computer network or telecommunication infrastructure. Your IDS is designed to aid in mitigating the damage that can be caused by hacking or breaking into sensitive computer and network systems. And of course, there are components of your IDS. Number one, your sensor. Your sensor collects traffic and user activity data and send it to your analyzer. They collect and send to analyzer. What do they collect? They collect traffic and user activity. Next, you have your analyzer. Your analyzer detects an activity that it is programmed to deem as fishy and sends the alert to administrative interface. They detect fishy, let us say fishy activity, okay? Activity. And they're going to send it to your administrative interface. And your administrative interface will report the alert details. Okay? And this helps your, let us say, your cybersecurity team for your intrusion detection system. So, of course, they could easily detect if there are any attempt, okay, any attempt to create a fraudulent transaction or fraudulent information retrieval. And of course, there are common functions of your IDS. Number one is to watch for any attacks. Number two, to parse audit logs, to protect your system files, to alert administrators during attack. So if there are any attack happening, your administration will be immediately alarmed or alerted. Next is to expose hackers' technique. Your technique or whatever technique that the hacker is trying to use, it will be revealed under your IDS. Okay? And your IDS has types. Number one, you have your network-based IDS and your host-based IDS. Your network-based is either host computers with the unnecessary software installed or dedicated appliances. Your NIC driver captures all traffic and passes it to an analyzer to look for specific type of pattern. Okay? Next, you have your host-based. Your host-based can be installed on individual workstation and servers and watch an inappropriate or anomalous activity. Your HIDS are usually made or usually used to make users do not delete system files, reconfigure important settings, or put the system at risk in any other way. And there are also IDS technologies that you can use, like your knowledge or signature based, your statistical anomaly based, or your rule based. Okay? Next, we go to your intrusion prevention. Your intrusion prevention system only detects that something bad may be taking place and sends an alert. Okay? The goal of an IPS is to detect an activity and not allow the traffic to gain access to the target. They will not allow to gain access to the target. What's the difference between your detection? Under the detection, it further gives you detail of what is happening and it informs your administration. Your IPS is a preventive and proactive technology. This is a preventive and proactive technology where an IDS is a detective and after-the-fact technology. So let's go back to your IDS. Your IDS is there. Intrusion detection system are detective and after the fact. Okay? Meaning, something happened already. Your intrusion detection system is a detective and after the fact technology, while your IPS is a preventive and proactive technology. All right? And of course, you have your access control assurance. For the access control assurance, there are two basic concepts that you have to look into. Number one, the accountability. It is the method of tracking and logging the subject's action on the object. And of course, you have your auditing. It is an activity where the users or subjects' action on the objects are monitored in order to verify that the sensitivity policies are enforced and can be used as investigation tool. And of course, if you have accountability, you should have the auditing for your access assurance, because also there are advantages of your audit. Number one, to track unauthorized activities performed by individuals. Number two, to detect intrusion. Number three, reconstruct events and system condition. And number four, you will provide legal resource material and produce problem reports. That's under your audit. So your audit is very important in terms of your access control assurance. And of course, you should note that a security professional should be able to access an environment and its security goal, know what action should be audited, and know what is to be done with that information after it is captured. Now, under your audit, what are you doing, or what are you auditing? Number one, the system level events. Number two, application level events. And number three, user level events. So maybe you want me to write it down as well. Again, under your audit, what do you audit? One is your system level events. The second one is your application level events. And the third one is your user level events. Okay? And during the review of your audit information, audit trails can be reviewed manually or through automated means. Meaning, if you do your information or your assurance control audit, you can do that manually, or they can have a walkthrough on your automated system. And your audit trail analysis tool will help in reducing and filtering the audit log information that is not necessary, and it provides only those information necessary for auditing. So what are the audit trail analysis tool? Audit trail analysis tool. Number one, you have your audit reduction control. Your audit reduction control are tools reducing the amount of information within an audit log and discards mundane tasks, information and record system performance, security, and user functionality necessary for auditing. Next, you have your variance. Your variance is a detection tool, and this tool monitors computer and resource usage trends, and it will detect variations of unusual activity. The third one is your attack signature. Okay? Your attack signature is another detection tool, and this tool parses the audit logs based on some predefined patterns in the database. And lastly, you have your keystroke monitoring. Keystroke monitoring. Your keystroke monitoring is the last tool that you have for your audit trail analysis. Okay? So, you have to protect, or you have to do your audit in protecting data and log information. Audit logs should be protected by implementing strict access control. Again, it boils down to your access control system. The integrity of the data should be ensured with the use of digital signatures, message digest tool, and strong access control. The confidentiality can be protected with the encryption and access control and can be stored on your CD-ROMs or any other things or any other tool that you may use for storage in order to prevent loss or modification of your data. By the way, when you say modification of data, or the modification of flag is also called your scrubbing. Okay, like scrubbing of face. Anyway, lastly, any unauthorized access attempts to audit logs should be captured and reported under your audit. Okay? That ends your access security or your access control topic. And of course, review them for your reference and for your exam coming this Thursday. God bless on your review.